The massive alien ship appeared in Earth's orbit just as the sun was rising over Terra Station Alpha. It was a Monday morning, the kind where everyone on the station was still nursing their weekend hangovers and complaining about the coffee machine being broken again. Nobody expected the Valorians to arrive early, but there they were, their royal vessel gleaming like a floating cathedral made of crystal and starlight. Station Commander Patricia Hayes nearly dropped her tablet when the docking request came through 6 hours ahead of schedule. She scrambled to get everyone in position, pulling maintenance crews off their lunch breaks and forcing diplomats to rush through their morning routines. The whole station transformed from its usual organized chaos into something resembling actual military precision, though just barely. Then Queen Velthara stepped off her ship, and every human on that docking platform forgot how to breathe. She was magnificent in a way that made you feel small and awestruck at the same time. 8 feet tall, her body covered in crystalline plates that caught the station's artificial light and threw it back in 1,000 different shades of blue and violet. She moved with the kind of grace that made you think of dancers and warriors all at once. Her court followed behind her, each member almost as impressive, but none quite matching the Queen's presence. Behind them all, holding tight to one of the court advisor's hands, was a little girl. Princess Lyra looked like a miniature version of her mother, though her crystalline plates glowed a softer, lighter blue. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old by human standards, and she kept glancing around the station with wide eyes that shifted through colors like an oil slick in sunlight. Some of the human observers smiled at her. Kids were kids, no matter what planet they came from. The welcome ceremony began in the main conference hall, the one they'd spent 3 days decorating with both human and Valyrian symbols of peace. Ambassador Mitchell gave his prepared speech about cooperation and mutual understanding. Queen Velthara responded with words about building bridges between worlds. Everyone was very proper and diplomatic, using the kind of language that sounded important but didn't really say much of anything concrete. That's when Princess Lyra started swaying on her feet. At first, nobody really noticed. She was a kid standing through a boring adult ceremony, probably just tired from the journey. But then one of the Valyrian advisors made a sharp sound, something between a gasp and a whistle. The Queen's head snapped toward her daughter just as the little princess crumpled to the floor. The room exploded into controlled panic. Valyrian guards surrounded the child within seconds. Human medical teams rushed forward with scanners and equipment. Commander Hayes started barking orders into her comm unit, clearing hallways and preparing the medical wing. The carefully planned ceremony dissolved into chaos as everyone tried to help. They carried Princess Lyra to the medical bay on a floating stretcher, her mother running alongside with an expression that looked almost human in its raw terror. The crystalline plates on the child's body had already started losing their color, fading from that soft blue to something closer to ash gray. She was conscious but barely, her eyes unfocused and tears streaming down her face. The Valyrian physicians went to work immediately, speaking rapidly in their own language while human doctors stood by feeling helpless and ignorant. The translation devices struggled to keep up with the medical terminology, spitting out fragments that didn't make much sense. Something about essence. Something about fade. Something about emotional distress and psychosomatic collapse. Dr. Lisa Chen, the station's chief medical officer, finally got a clear explanation from the head Valyrian physician about 2 hours into the crisis. The condition was called essence fade, and it happened to young Valorians when they experienced severe emotional or psychological trauma. Their bodies simply started shutting down, not from any physical illness, but from a kind of spiritual exhaustion. The child had to want to recover. She had to want to eat, to drink, to live. And right now, Princess Lyra wanted none of those things. She just cried. Soft, heartbreaking sounds that echoed through the medical wing and made every human who heard them want to help somehow. But there was nothing they could do. Human medicine had no reference point for this. The Valyrian treatments weren't working either. The little princess refused every food offered to her, turned away from water, and just kept crying while her crystalline plates grew duller and grayer by the hour. Queen Velthara sat beside her daughter's bed, holding one small hand, looking more vulnerable than anyone expected. The mighty queen who commanded an empire now looked like any mother watching her child slip away. She barely spoke, barely moved, just held her daughter's hand and watched her fade. By midnight, the diplomatic mission was completely forgotten. Nobody cared about peace treaties or trade agreements or humanity's admission to the galactic community. Everyone was focused on one thing, trying to save a dying child. The Valyrian guards started getting aggressive around 3 in the morning. They positioned themselves at every entrance to the medical wing, their weapons visible, their body language screaming threat. They blamed the station, the humans, something about Earth that was poisoning their princess. It wasn't rational, but grief rarely is. Commander Hayes called an emergency meeting at dawn. The station's leadership gathered in a conference room while Princess Lyra continued to fade 2 floors below them. The news was bad. The Valorians were giving them 72 hours. 3 days to find some kind of solution, or they would leave Terra Station Alpha forever, taking their alliance and humanity's best chance at joining the greater galactic community with them. But more importantly than politics or diplomacy, a little girl was dying. And nobody, human or Valerian, had any idea how to save her. Down in the medical wing, the crying continued through the night, soft and constant and utterly heartbreaking. The nurses changed shifts. The doctors consulted their databases. The Valerian physicians tried every treatment they knew. And Princess Lyra just kept slipping further away, her crystalline plates now almost completely gray, her small body growing weaker with every passing hour. On the night shift, a janitor named Robert Hayes pushed his cleaning cart through the quiet corridors, mopping floors and emptying trash bins, completely unaware that in less than 24 hours, he would become the most important human being in 2 star systems. Robert Hayes had been working the night shift on Terra Station Alpha for 3 years now, and he preferred it that way. 51 years old, gray starting to show in his hair, with the kind of tired eyes that came from carrying too much grief for too long. His wife Linda had died 5 years ago, cancer that came too fast and took her too quick. Their daughter Amy would have turned 8 this year if the accident hadn't happened 2 years after Linda passed. Earth had too many memories. Every street corner reminded him of Linda laughing at his terrible jokes. Every park had echoes of Amy chasing pigeons and begging for ice cream. So when the chance came to work on the station, Robert took it without hesitation. Up here, surrounded by stars and steel, he could just exist without the constant weight of what he'd lost. The night shift suited him perfectly. He mopped floors while everyone else slept. He cleaned windows that looked out into space. He emptied trash bins and scrubbed walls and made everything spotless before the day shift arrived. The work was simple, repetitive, and required zero emotional investment. That's exactly what he needed. His supervisor, a grumpy woman named Margaret who'd been cleaning stations since before Robert was born, always said he was too quiet. Too in his head. She worried about him sometimes, but Robert always waved her off. He was fine. He was managing. He just wanted to be left alone with his mop and his memories. Tuesday night started like any other. Robert clocked in at 10 p.m., got his assignment sheet from Margaret, and loaded up his cleaning cart. The medical wing first, then the crew quarters, then the observation decks. Standard route, nothing special. He'd heard about the sick alien princess, of course. Everyone on the station was talking about it. But that was important people business, way above his pay grade. He made his way through the medical wing quietly, staying out of everyone's way. The Valerian guards watched him with suspicious eyes, but his janitor uniform and cleaning cart marked him as harmless. Just another invisible worker doing invisible work. The doctors and nurses were too busy to notice him at all. Robert preferred it that way. Around midnight, he headed to the observation decks. There were 3 of them, large circular rooms with massive windows that showed stunning views of Earth and the stars beyond. Usually, they were public spaces where crew members came to relax and think. But tonight, one of them had a big red sign on the door, sealed for royal privacy, no entry. Robert knew he should skip it and move to the next one. The sign was clear enough. But his assignment sheet specifically said to clean all 3 observation decks, and Margaret had a nasty habit of checking his work. She'd written him up twice last month for missing spots. Besides, how dirty could it get if it was sealed off? He knocked first, just to be polite. No answer. He knocked again, a little louder. Still nothing. Robert figured the room was empty, just sealed off in case the Queen wanted to use it. He pulled out his master access card, the one that opened every non-secure door on the station, and swiped it through the reader. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and that's when he heard it. Crying. A child crying. Robert froze halfway through pushing his cleaning cart, his hand still on the handle. The sound wasn't alien or strange. It was just a kid, sobbing the way kids do when they're scared and alone and don't know what else to do. The kind of crying that comes from deep in the chest and won't stop no matter how hard you try. Every regulation he'd ever been taught said to back out immediately. Close the door. Report it to security. Let the important people handle important things. This was the alien princess, probably, and he was just a janitor. He had no business being here. Margaret would fire him on the spot if she found out. Commander Hayes might have him arrested for breaching a secure area. But Robert stood there, one hand on his cleaning cart, and all he could hear was Amy. Amy crying in the hospital after her mother died, asking why Mommy wasn't waking up. Amy crying after she fell off her bike and scraped her knee, even though she tried so hard to be brave. Amy crying in the car on the way to school because the other kids made fun of her lunchbox. All those times Robert had held her and told her everything would be okay, even when he didn't believe it himself. And then that final time, when Amy cried out for him after the car accident, and he was stuck in traffic 20 miles away. When he got to the hospital, she was already gone. He never got to hold her one more time. Never got to tell her it would be okay. Never got to be there when she needed him most. The crying continued from inside the observation deck, and Robert felt something crack in his chest. He left his cleaning cart in the hallway and went inside. The observation deck was dark except for the light from Earth below, that beautiful blue and white marble turning slowly in the window. And there, curled up beneath the largest viewport, was the smallest figure Robert had ever seen look so alone. Princess Lyra was maybe 3 feet tall, her crystalline body tucked into a tight ball. Her plates, which he'd heard were supposed to be bright blue, looked dull and gray even in the dim light. She was sobbing quietly, her small frame shaking with each breath. No guards. No mother. No doctors. Just a terrified little girl who looked exactly like every scared kid Robert had ever seen. He should have left. Should have called someone. Should have done literally anything except what he did next. Robert sat down on the floor about 10 feet away from her. Not too close, didn't want to scare her more. Just close enough that she'd know someone was there. He pulled his lunch container out of his jacket pocket, the one with leftover meatloaf and mashed potatoes from the crew cafeteria. He opened it slowly, letting the sound announce his presence. The crying stuttered, then stopped. Princess Lyra lifted her head, those color-shifting eyes focusing on him through the darkness. Robert took a bite of his cold meatloaf, chewing slowly. Then he started talking, his voice soft and easy, the way he used to talk to Amy when she couldn't sleep. "You know what I like about this spot," he said, gesturing at the window with his fork. "You can see where I grew up from here. Little town in Kansas, right about there in the middle. Lots of wheat fields and not much else. My daughter used to make me point it out every time we looked at Earth pictures." He took another bite, not looking directly at the princess. Just talking to the window, to the stars, to the memory of his daughter. She loved space. Wanted to be an astronaut when she grew up. Had all these posters of planets on her bedroom wall. Could name every constellation visible from our backyard. Robert smiled at the memory, even though it hurt. "She would have loved meeting you. Would have had about 1,000,000 questions about your home planet." Princess Lyra was watching him now, her crying stopped completely. She didn't move, but she was listening. Robert spent all of Wednesday morning thinking about that little princess crying alone in the observation deck. He'd stayed with her for almost 2 hours Tuesday night, just talking about Earth and his daughter and anything else that came to mind. She hadn't said much, but she'd stopped crying. That felt like something. When his shift started Wednesday night, Robert had a plan. It was probably a stupid plan. Margaret would definitely fire him if she found out. But he couldn't stop thinking about how Princess Lyra had pointed at his meatloaf and then at Earth, asking through that stuttering translator what food came from down there. He'd spent his lunch break raiding the crew storage areas. A box of pasta from the Italian cook who smuggled it up from Rome. Butter and milk from the cafeteria's backup supplies. 4 different types of cheese that he'd traded favors to get: sharp cheddar, mild cheddar, a little bit of parmesan, and some cream cheese for extra smoothness. He'd even sweet-talked the baker into giving him some breadcrumbs and a tiny container of garlic powder. All of it was technically against regulations. Food was carefully inventoried on the station. Taking ingredients without authorization could get you written up or worse. But Robert figured if he was already breaking rules by visiting a sealed observation deck, he might as well go all in. He tucked everything into his cleaning cart under a pile of rags and made his way to the medical wing. The Valerian guards were still there, still looking suspicious and dangerous, but they'd gotten used to seeing him. Just the night janitor, harmless and invisible. They didn't even glance at his cart as he pushed past. The medical wing had a small kitchenette tucked in the back, mostly used by nurses to make coffee during long shifts. It had a stove, a sink, a small counter, and just enough space for what Robert needed. He set up his ingredients carefully, filling a pot with water and setting it on the burner. Then he went to find Princess Lyra. She was in the observation deck again, same spot as before. Still that terrible gray color, still curled up small, but she lifted her head when he came in. Those color-shifting eyes focused on him, and Robert could swear he saw something like recognition there. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said softly. "Remember me? I'm Robert. I was thinking maybe you'd want to come with me for a bit." I've got something to show you. She didn't move at first. Just watched him with those alien eyes that somehow still looked scared and young and hopeful all at once. Robert held out his hand, palm up, not pushing. Just offering. Princess Lyra uncurled slowly, her movements weak and shaky. But she stood up, those crystalline plates making soft clinking sounds as she moved. She didn't take his hand, couldn't quite bridge that gap yet, but she followed him out of the observation deck and down the hallway. The guards saw them and immediately moved to intercept, but Robert just smiled his most harmless smile. Just going to the kitchenette, fellas. Thought the little lady might like to watch someone cook. That okay? They didn't understand all his words, but they saw the princess following willingly. After a tense moment, they let them pass, though two guards followed at a distance. The kitchenette was tiny with Princess Lyra in it, but Robert managed to get her settled in one of the chairs. She perched on the edge, watching him with intense curiosity as he started gathering his contraband ingredients. "All right," Robert said, talking as he worked. "Let me tell you about mac and cheese. It's about the most basic comfort food we've got on Earth. Every kid grows up eating it. My daughter Amy used to request it every single Friday night. Called it Friday mac and cheese, like it was some kind of official holiday meal." He filled the pot with water, added a pinch of salt, and set it on the burner. Princess Lyra leaned forward, watching the flame appear underneath. "Fire," she said through her translator, the word coming out clearer than before. "That's right, fire. Well, artificial fire. Gas burner. It heats the water up real hot so we can cook the pasta." Robert pulled out the box of elbow macaroni and showed it to her. "These are noodles. They start out hard and dry, but when you boil them in water, they get soft and perfect for eating." "Why water bubble?" Lyra asked, pointing at the pot as it started to heat. "Good question. Water bubbles when it gets hot enough to turn into steam. See, water can be three things: ice when it's cold, liquid like this when it's normal, and steam when it's really hot. The bubbles are water trying to become steam but getting trapped under more water." She tilted her head, processing this. Robert could almost see her mind working, taking in information, being curious instead of just sad. That was good. That was really good. The water came to a boil, and Robert poured in the pasta. "Now we wait about 8 minutes for these to cook. While that happens, I'm going to make the cheese sauce. That's the secret to really good mac and cheese. You can't just use one cheese. You need a blend." He pulled out a grater and the block of sharp cheddar. "My wife Linda, she was the cook in our family. I could barely make toast without burning it. But she taught me this recipe because Amy loved it so much. Linda said cooking for someone you love is one of the best ways to show you care." Robert started grating the cheese, the sharp smell filling the small kitchenette. Princess Lyra's nose wrinkled, but she didn't pull away. Just watched as the yellow shreds piled up on the cutting board. "Cheese is basically solid milk," Robert explained. "Humans figured out thousands of years ago that if you do special things to milk, it turns into this whole different food. We've got hundreds of types of cheese. This sharp cheddar, it's got a strong flavor. The mild cheddar is softer. Parmesan adds a salty kick. And cream cheese makes everything smooth and creamy." He drained the pasta, then started making the roux. Butter in the pot, melting slowly. Flour whisked in until it formed a paste. Then milk, added gradually while stirring constantly. Princess Lyra watched every movement, fascinated. "Why butter melt?" she asked. "Butter's mostly fat, and fat melts when it gets hot. Same reason your body heat would melt ice cream if you held it too long." Robert kept stirring, watching the sauce thicken. Now comes the magic part. He added the cheeses handful by handful, stirring as they melted into the sauce. The sharp cheddar first, turning the white sauce golden. Then the mild cheddar for smoothness. A sprinkle of parmesan. A scoop of cream cheese. "My daughter Amy loved this part," Robert said quietly. "She'd stand on a stool next to Linda and watch the cheese melt, and she'd say it looked like magic gold. Linda would let her sprinkle the garlic powder on top. That was Amy's special job." He pulled out the tiny container of garlic powder and held it where Princess Lyra could see. "This is the real secret. Just a little pinch. Not too much, or it gets too strong. But just enough gives it that extra something that makes it perfect." "Secret," Lyra repeated, her translator processing the word more smoothly now. "Something special. Something you don't tell everyone." "That's right." Robert smiled at her. "You remembered. Why tell me?" The princess looked up at him with those shifting color eyes, and Robert saw real curiosity there. Real engagement. She was thinking, questioning, being a kid again instead of just a dying patient. Robert stopped stirring and met her gaze. Because you remind me of my Amy. She was about your age. 7 years old. Loved asking questions about everything. And when she was sad or scared, her mama would make this for her. It always helped, even when things were really bad. He poured the cheese sauce over the pasta, stirring it together. And because sometimes the best thing you can do for someone who's hurting is share something that mattered to you. Something that made you feel better when you needed it. The guards were watching from the doorway now, weapons still ready but postures slightly relaxed. They could see their princess leaning forward, interested, engaged in a way she hadn't been in days. Robert spooned the mac and cheese into a small bowl, then sprinkled breadcrumbs on top. He put it under the broiler for just a minute, watching them turn golden brown. When he pulled it out, the whole kitchenette smelled like comfort and home and Friday nights with family. He blew on a spoonful to cool it down, then held it out to Princess Lyra. Want to try? She stared at the spoon for a long moment. The guards tensed. Robert held perfectly still, just offering, not pushing. Then Princess Lyra reached out with one crystalline hand and took the spoon. The emergency alert reached Queen Velthara during a critical negotiation session at 3 in the morning. Her daughter was eating. Her daughter was glowing blue again. Her daughter was saved. The queen abandoned the conference room so fast she left scorch marks on the floor from her crystalline feet, her entire court scrambling to follow. She'd been preparing herself for this moment for hours. One of the human medical team had finally done it, figured out some brilliant solution that Valyrian science had missed. Or maybe it was their advanced pharmaceuticals, or some experimental treatment they'd been too polite to mention earlier. Queen Velthara had spent the last 36 hours watching her daughter fade, feeling more helpless than she'd ever felt in her life. Now someone had saved Lyra, and the queen was ready to offer them anything. Wealth beyond measure. A position in the Valyrian court. A province to govern. Whatever they wanted. She burst into the medical wing with her guards flanking her, her advisor rushing behind trying to explain something about a janitor and a kitchenette. The queen wasn't listening. She just needed to see her daughter, needed to see that blue glow with her own eyes, needed to know this wasn't some cruel mistake. The guards led her to a small kitchenette in the back of the medical wing. Queen Velthara had to duck to get through the doorway, her 8-foot frame barely fitting in the cramped space. And there, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a piece of paper between them, were her daughter and a human man who looked absolutely nothing like what she'd expected. He was old by human standards, gray in his hair and lines around his eyes. He wore a janitor's uniform, faded and worn from years of use. No medals, no impressive credentials, no white coat or fancy equipment. Just a middle-aged man in work clothes, drawing something on a scrap of paper while Princess Lyra giggled and pointed at it. The princess's crystalline plates glowed bright sapphire blue, the healthiest color they'd shown in days. She had a bowl in her lap, nearly empty, with traces of some yellow-orange substance clinging to the sides. 2 other bowls sat nearby, also empty. Lyra was leaning against the human's shoulder, completely relaxed, completely comfortable, completely alive. Queen Velthara felt her breath catch in her throat. No, see, you've got to block me here, Robert was saying, pointing at the paper. I've got 2 in a row. If you don't put your circle there, I'm going to win. You've got to think 1 move ahead. But I want to go here, Lyra said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. She pointed at a different square on what the queen now recognized as a simple grid game. Well, you can, but then I'm going to win. Is that what you want? Lyra considered this very seriously, then moved her finger to the square Robert had indicated. There. That's my girl. Smart thinking. Robert drew a circle in the square, then deliberately made his next X in a spot that didn't give him the win. The queen realized he was letting her daughter learn, letting her feel successful, being kind in ways that didn't announce themselves. One of the Valyrian advisors cleared their throat loudly. Robert looked up and froze when he saw Queen Velthara filling the doorway. He started to scramble to his feet, but the queen held up one crystalline hand. Mama. Princess Lyra jumped up, the bowl tumbling from her lap. She rushed to her mother with more energy than she'd shown in days. Mama, look. Robert made earth food. It's called mac and cheese and it tastes like sunshine and home and everything good. And he taught me tic-tac-toe. I won twice. The queen knelt down, gathering her daughter into her arms, feeling the healthy warmth of her crystalline plates, the strength in her small body. She held Lyra tight, and for a moment she couldn't speak past the relief threatening to overwhelm her. When she finally looked up at Robert, who was standing awkwardly near the counter looking terrified, Queen Velthara felt something she rarely experienced, complete and total humility. She had expected a genius. She'd found something better. Someone who saw her daughter as a child who needed comfort, food and kindness, not as a diplomatic crisis or a medical mystery. The queen stood slowly, still holding Lyra in her arms. Her guards moved to flank her, her advisors clustered behind. The small kitchenette suddenly felt even more cramped with so many bodies. Robert backed up against the counter, clearly understanding he was in serious trouble, clearly expecting punishment for breaking about 50 different protocols. Queen Velthara set her daughter down gently. Then, in a movement that made every human and Valerian in the room gasp, she knelt on the floor. A full formal kneel, one knee and then the other, her 8-foot frame folding down until she could press her forehead to the ground in front of Robert's feet. It was the highest form of respect in Valerian culture. Reserved for saving the life of royalty. Reserved for debts that could never truly be repaid. The queen's guards immediately followed suit, kneeling in unison. Her advisors dropped to their knees. Every Valerian in the medical wing who could see what was happening knelt where they stood. Robert looked absolutely panicked. Please, you don't need to do that. I just made her some dinner. It's really not. You saved her. Queen Velthara's voice was thick with emotion. My physicians could not. Your physicians could not. Medicine failed. Science failed. But you saw my daughter crying and you made her feel safe. She lifted her head, still kneeling, looking up at this janitor who'd given her back her child. Tell me what you want. Anything in my power to give, it is yours. Wealth? Position? Land on our homeworld? Name it. Robert looked deeply uncomfortable with the entire situation. He glanced at Princess Lyra, who was watching him with those color-shifting eyes, then back at the queen. I don't want anything like that. Then what? The queen stood gracefully, towering over him again. You saved my daughter's life. There must be something. Robert was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting back to Princess Lyra. When he spoke, his voice was soft. Tell me about her. Queen Velthara blinked, her crystalline plates shifting in confusion. I do not understand. Tell me about Lyra. Not the princess part. Just Lyra. Robert leaned back against the counter, his posture relaxing slightly. What makes her laugh? What's she afraid of? What does she dream about? Does she have friends back home? What's her favorite thing to do? The queen stared at him, completely baffled. That is what you want? Information about my daughter? I spent 2 nights talking to her, and I realized I don't really know anything about her except that she's sad and scared and likes mac and cheese. Robert smiled slightly. If I'm going to keep making her dinner, seems like I should know more about who she is. Queen Velthara felt something crack in her chest, the same way it had when she first saw her daughter glowing blue again. This human wasn't asking for payment. He was asking for connection. He was asking to know her daughter as a person. She walked to one of the chairs and sat down, gesturing for Robert to sit across from her. He did, still looking nervous but less terrified. Princess Lyra immediately climbed into his lap, settling there like she'd known him for years instead of days. Her full name is Lyrathena Vel Shatov, the queen began. She loves music. On our homeworld, we have instruments that create sound through resonance in crystal formations. Lyra can play 3 different types already. The vote came through on a Thursday morning, 3 months after Princess Lyra had first tasted mac and cheese. The Galactic Council convened in their massive station near the center of the galaxy. Representatives from 4 to 7 different species gathered to decide humanity's fate. Earth had been applying for membership for 5 years, submitting documentation about their technology, their culture, their peaceful intentions. Every year, they'd been rejected. Too primitive. Too warlike. Too unpredictable. This year was different. Queen Velthara stood before the council and gave a speech that humans would be talking about for generations. She told them about her daughter dying, about medicine failing, about fear and helplessness. Then she told them about a janitor who made comfort food in a tiny kitchenette because he saw a scared child instead of a diplomatic crisis. The vote was unanimous. Humanity was accepted into the Galactic Council with one condition. Robert Hayes must serve as their first ambassador to Valoria. Not as a diplomat, not as a political representative, but as himself. The janitor who'd saved a princess with pasta and cheese. The human delegation back on Terra Station Alpha received the news with mixed reactions. Commander Patricia Hayes, Robert's sister, called him immediately with tears in her voice. She was proud, she was terrified, she didn't understand what was happening but somehow her baby brother had just changed everything for humanity. Ambassador Mitchell, the actual trained diplomat who'd spent 20 years preparing for first contact, had to be sedated. His life's work had been reduced to a footnote because a janitor broke protocol and made dinner. The media loved it. The politicians hated it. The regular people thought it was the most human thing they'd ever heard. Robert's response, when they finally tracked him down during his shift, was to laugh so hard he nearly dropped his mop. "You want me to be an ambassador? I clean toilets for a living. I don't know the first thing about politics." But Queen Velthara had been very specific in her nomination. She didn't want a politician. She wanted Robert. The human who understood that sometimes the most important thing you could do was make someone feel safe and cared for. The man who'd seen her daughter as a child first and a princess second. The vote had included a very unusual clause: Robert Hayes would serve as ambassador, but he wouldn't be expected to do traditional diplomatic work. No treaty negotiations. No trade agreements. No formal protocols. He would simply live on Valoria, be himself, and represent humanity through his actions rather than his words. Robert thought about it for exactly one night. He thought about Terra Station Alpha, about mopping floors and trying not to remember too much. He thought about Linda and Amy, about the life he'd lost and the years he'd spent just trying to get through each day. Then he thought about Princess Lyra's face when she'd tasted mac and cheese for the first time, about how she'd looked at him like he'd given her the whole universe in a bowl. He accepted the next morning. The human government scrambled to prepare him. They tried to give him diplomatic training, cultural sensitivity courses, language lessons in Valerian. Robert showed up to exactly one class, sat through 15 minutes of proper greeting protocols for royal courts, and walked out. He called Queen Velthara directly using the personal communication code she'd given him. "Do you want me to bow properly and use fancy titles, or do you want me to be the guy who made your daughter dinner?" he asked. The Queen's laugh echoed through the communicator. "Bring recipes, Robert. Bring your stories. Bring yourself. That is all we want." So that's what he did. Robert Hayes packed 3 suitcases for his trip to Valoria. One had clothes. One had personal items, including photos of Linda and Amy that he still couldn't quite bring himself to look at most days. The third was completely full of cooking supplies, recipe cards, and ingredients that wouldn't spoil during the journey. The departure ceremony at Terra Station Alpha was supposed to be formal and dignified. Robert showed up in his janitor uniform because it was the most comfortable thing he owned. Margaret, his supervisor, cried and hugged him and told him he'd better come back and visit. The crew from the night shift made him a banner that said "From Mops to Diplomacy." Commander Hayes gave him a long hug and whispered, "Linda and Amy would be so proud of you." The trip to Valoria took 2 weeks on the fastest ship humanity had. Robert spent most of it in the kitchen, teaching the ship's cook how to make proper mashed potatoes and arguing about the right way to season a roast. The Valerian pilot found him one night making cookies and asked why he was working when he was supposed to be a passenger. "Can't show up empty-handed," Robert said, sliding another tray into the oven. "That's just rude." When they finally arrived at Valoria, Robert looked out the viewport at a world that seemed to be made entirely of crystal and light. Cities that glowed from within, mountains that reflected starlight, oceans that sparkled like liquid diamonds. It was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. Nothing like Earth. Nothing like home. The landing platform was crowded with Valerian officials, media drones, and what looked like half the royal court. Robert walked down the ship's ramp carrying a box of still-warm cookies, feeling completely out of his depth. Then he heard a shout. "Robert!" Princess Lyra broke free from her mother's side and ran across the platform, her crystalline plates glowing brilliant blue. She crashed into Robert with enough force to make him stagger, wrapping her arms around his waist and nearly knocking his cookie box to the ground. "You came. You really came. Mama said you would, but I was worried you'd change your mind and I missed you so much. And did you bring the cheese? The cheddar cheese? Because the food here is good but it doesn't taste like home and I've been telling everyone about Friday mac and cheese and—" "Lyra, let the man breathe," Queen Velthara said, but she was smiling as she approached. She placed one crystalline hand on Robert's shoulder in a gesture he'd learned meant deep respect and affection among her people. "Welcome to Valoria, Ambassador Hayes." "Just Robert. We talked about this." "Just Robert," she agreed. "Come. We have prepared quarters for you. And a kitchen. A very large kitchen," Lyra insisted. The media drones swarmed around them as they walked toward the palace, but Robert barely noticed. Princess Lyra was holding his hand, talking non-stop about everything she wanted to show him, everything she wanted him to cook, everything she'd been doing since they'd last seen each other. The formal introduction came that evening. Robert stood in a throne room that looked like the inside of a geode, surrounded by Valerian nobility who towered over him and glittered in the light. Princess Lyra stood next to him, and when Queen Velthara asked her to introduce their guest, the little princess spoke loud and clear. "This is Ambassador Robert," she announced. "He's the human who makes food that tastes like home. He saved my life by seeing me when everyone else just saw a problem to fix. He's going to teach us about Earth, and kindness, and why Friday mac and cheese is the best tradition in the whole galaxy." The Valerian court bowed in unison. Not the deep formal bow reserved for royalty, but something else. Something more personal. Recognition of someone who'd done something that mattered. Robert bowed back, awkward and unpracticed, and the whole room erupted in what he would learn was Valerian applause, a chiming sound they made by tapping their crystalline plates together. Over the next months, something unexpected happened. Robert opened a small restaurant in the capital city, just a simple place with a dozen tables and a kitchen where he could cook. He served Earth food, mac and cheese, meatloaf, pot roast, chocolate chip cookies, apple pie. Simple comfort food that reminded him of home. Valorians lined up for hours to try it.